thy faithfulness. Great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning new mercies I see. All I have needed thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. It's an old one. In the church I grew up in, we didn't sing this one, so it wasn't an old one to me at a certain time. These well-known lyrics were written in 1923 by Thomas Chisholm, who had been a Methodist minister, which is probably why we didn't sing it, and who was a prolific poet. As with many hymn writers, his inspiration was the movement of God in his life and the words of Holy Scripture, and in this case, the Book of Lamentations, written in the 6th century BCE, a collection of poetic laments for the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian exile. Lamentations 3, verse 22 and 23. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. Chisholm sent his poem adaptation to Reverend William Runyon, the musician of the Moody Bible Institute and the editor of the Hope Publishing Company in Chicago. Runyon later wrote, "This particular poem held such an appeal that I prayed most earnestly that my tune might carry over its message in a worthy way, and the subsequent history of its use indicates that God answered the prayer." I'm drawn back to the inspiration for this lovely hymn. It's the Book of Lamentations. Lamentations, Babylonian exile, lament, grief, sorrow. How do these words about faithfulness fit in? Well, if you ask me, or just about anybody who's read some of it, actually the Bible has a whole lot of lamentation in it. The Hebrew scriptures, right, are stories of travail and difficulty overcome, of failing and restoration, of falling again and coming back, always coming back. And how often does Jesus tell us and show us in the New Testament too? From parables like the prodigal son to the words of John 16, verse 33, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. Hear that. So in me you may have peace. I could pick verses like this all day, and in my personal prayer, I often do. But what about today's gospel, you say? What about whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters and even life itself cannot be my disciple? Yeah. Because that feels a far cry from great is thy faithfulness. But our Deuteronomy reading this morning about Moses echoes the relationship aspect of faithfulness. Choose life so that you and your descendants might live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him, and holding fast to him, for that means life to you. Faithfulness is God, and choosing God is choosing life. Loving God and living in God's ways is the source of life. Paul's letter to Philemon that we read this morning is written from prison. Clearly, relying on God's faithfulness and living God's ways doesn't guarantee that life will be easy. In fact, in real life, for Paul and for most of the first disciples who were horribly martyred, it didn't work out that way. And life wasn't easy for the hymn writer Thomas Chisholm, who had serious health issues that ran him into serious financial issues and yet still chose to write from his heart, "Great is thy faithfulness." A life of just plain ease doesn't generally work out for most of us either, does it? But Jesus has warned us that it would be this way, that it would be hard. Still, in today's gospel verse, with Jesus' frequent oratory style of hyperbole, that news sounds shockingly harsh. Whoever comes to me and does not hate mother, father, Now, in unpacking biblical translations in other texts throughout this year, we've noted that hate in our modern usage as despising and deep animosity isn't the way the Greek is written, where hate is used differently. In context, hate might mean puts after or loves a little bit lesser. So when you think of the greatest love of your lives, like the love you would have for a mother or a father or a sibling or a partner or a friend, Jesus is saying you have to love God even more than that. Well, that's a little easier to hear than the gospel with the other ears. But I think it's still awfully challenging. I know I've told you before that this passage distressed me greatly when I was a child, because I knew, and I knew God knew, without a doubt, that I loved my mother best, and most, and more than Jesus. Really. I did, and maybe I still do. The difference is, now, with a more mature faith, I understand that Jesus doesn't mind. Jesus is not jealous, measuring out love in dribbles and balance sheets. All the love I feel comes from God, and the spark of God is inside every person that I love, and it's inside every person I kind of don't love, too. Jesus is not worried about how much I love my mother, or my father, or my son who's up there with him talking Jesus' ear off and telling rude jokes. Jesus delights in us and our love. But this Jesus today, in this harsh gospel, he is challenging where our loyalty is. What is our ultimate allegiance? What is our faithfulness? When push comes to shove, will we covenant with Jesus? Will we stand with Jesus against all else and all others, even those close to us, if need be? New Testament professor Dr. Mitzi Smith points out, Jesus understands that there are consequences associated with following Jesus, with conducting one's life in the way that Jesus does. To champion the cause of the poor and the diseased, to love one's calling as more expansive than the confines of the temple or the church, to sometimes buck traditions and those who view those traditions as infallible, to struggle for the alleviation of poverty and a living wage for all at the expense of one's own privilege, and to expand one's concept of family to include neighbors far and near. Carrying the cross is a daily struggle and a commitment that must be renewed every day when confronted with the temptation to lay it down. She concludes, perhaps what Jesus means by hating family is to refuse to live by narrow, exclusive ideas of family when it comes to meeting human needs and contributing to the wholeness of all human beings. So right here, right now, Jesus warns us, his followers, not to come in with 2 bricks shy of a load, or we won't get our tower of loving our neighbor built. Recognize the costs and recognize God's faithfulness, and then you can build with confidence despite the costs. Confidence in God's faithfulness no matter what. And what is asked of us on our side of this covenant? I hear the prophet Micah in my head, and we sang Micah's words this morning. He has told you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. We don't have to earn God's love, God's faithfulness, but to live fully into it, to choose life. We know what the Lord requires of us, and we know what Jesus told us. Love your neighbor, and doing justice and loving kindness and walking humbly with God and loving your neighbor as yourself. They're hard to do in a worldly, power-hungry culture. There absolutely will be a cost. But hear God exhorting the people, us, today, through Moses, to choose life so that you may live loving the Lord your God, obeying him and holding fast to him, for that means life to you. When you have to choose God, which does mean choosing life, because that's where life is, even in the midst of hardship. That's the point. We're not doing a quid pro quo so that God will love us. The only place we're going to find life is with God. And at this point in today's gospel, a large crowd is following Jesus from town to town. And why wouldn't they, since he was providing fishes and miracles and was proclaiming words of hope that many of them interpreted as, pretty soon we're going to overthrow Rome with this guy. But Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, and it's going to get harder and harder, not just for him, but for those following him. And he is calling out to people that it's not just fish and miracles. Discipleship is hard work. Be prepared. Don't we know it too, right? Aren't we seeing it all around us in these harsh times with our own nation eschewing love and care of neighbor? Choosing life in Jesus Christ and living it out loud is risky in these times. Great is thy faithfulness, holy God. This we believe. This we experience. This brings us to the altar of Jesus Christ. It's not an earned relationship, a be faithful and God will reward you exchange. That's prosperity gospel heresy, not the gospel of Jesus Christ. Nothing can separate us from God loving us, but we can separate ourselves from recognizing that love in our lives, and so from experiencing the fullness of life that flourishes in that love despite every cost. The third verse of Thomas Chisholm's hymn names the strength for today and hope for tomorrow that is the gift of God's faithfulness. That is the gift that we need to lean into right now to carry our cross and more to help others who are being mercilessly oppressed to carry theirs. Prepared to do our costly work as disciples of Jesus Christ. Of all the prices we pay in this life, of all the things we prioritize, this is the one, friends. Jesus tells us, whatever the cost, this is where life is. Trust this. This one is worth it. Do you trust him? Great is thy faithfulness, O God. That is everything.